The moment Ava pushed the last box against her bare wall, she froze, because something inside it shifted with a soft thud, as if something unsettled was trying to breathe. The room around her was empty enough to echo, but her thoughts were louder than the hollow space she'd built. She had told herself this challenge was about clarity, about stripping life down to what mattered, yet the silence felt sharper than hunger. What if the thing you fear most isn't the noise in your life, but the silence you've been avoiding? What if the room you empty begins to expose the places inside you that aren't empty at all? Her stomach tightened, a raw reminder of the $10 limit she'd set. The air tasted metallic, like a warning. Then the box shifted again, just slightly, and her breath caught. She wondered if hunger was only the beginning of what would surface, now that there was nowhere left to hide. Ava stepped into the small neighborhood grocery store with a tightness in her chest that she pretended was determination. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, filling the space with an oddly sterile glow. She moved slowly past aisles, overflowing with choices she could no longer afford to consider. Her $10 limit pressed against her ribs like a quiet accusation. She kept telling herself this was minimalism, that she was choosing simplicity, that anyone could strip their life down to essentials if they really tried. But as her fingers brushed a loaf of bread before she checked the price and pulled away, she felt the sting of something deeper than restraint. Hunger sharpened her senses and made the world feel louder. She wondered if she was learning discipline or simply denying a need she didn't want to face. Back in her apartment, Ava laid her tiny collection of groceries on the counter, the items looking smaller than they had in the store. A packet of rice, a few potatoes, a bruised apple. The silence felt heavier now, as though the empty room were waiting for her reaction. She leaned on the counter, letting her breath go uneven. She told herself this was intentional living, that simplicity meant learning to be satisfied with less. But the truth gnawed at her ribs. This wasn't the calm clarity she expected. This was scarcity dressed up as discipline. The window rattled softly in the breeze, and she felt the same shiver inside her. She wondered if she had mistaken deprivation for wisdom. The box in the corner remained still, yet her eyes drifted toward it, uneasy. By evening, the first ache of hunger had grown into something sharper. Ava tried to distract herself by sweeping the already clean floor, but every motion made her lighter, almost dizzy. She crouched down, running the broom under the window's edge even though nothing was there. Her mind kept drifting back to the idea of control. She wanted to believe she was choosing this, that she was stronger because of it. But every time her stomach growled, the lie pressed harder. She sat down, breathing slowly, feeling the hollow inside her deepen. She wondered whether minimalism could become another mask, another way of hiding from the things she refused to face. When the box cracked softly as the cardboard settled, she almost flinched. As night settled, Ava boiled a small pot of rice, the steam rising in thin, ghost-like threads. She ate slowly, measuring each bite as though she needed to make the small portion last forever. The warmth helped, but only for a moment. The apartment felt colder once the pot was empty. She set the spoon down and closed her eyes, letting the exhaustion roll over her. She kept telling herself this was growth, a lesson in simplicity, a reminder of what mattered. But the deeper truth pressed itself forward. Intentional living loses meaning when the body is ignored. She looked toward the corner again where the box sat unmoving. She felt a sting of dread at the thought of opening it, because she already knew it held more than objects. It held everything she'd pushed away. By the second morning, hunger had become a steady drumbeat under Ava's ribs, pulsing in a way she could no longer ignore. She woke with her throat dry and her limbs heavy, as though her body had used the night to argue with her choices. She tried to sit up slowly, but dizziness rolled through her like a wave, forcing her to pause and breathe. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the outside world slipping through the window, a reminder that life continued with or without her experiment. She touched her stomach gently, surprised by how sharp the ache felt. There was no clarity here, no revelation. only the raw reminder that survival isn't something you can romanticize. She stood and steadied herself, feeling unbalanced, and for the first time wondered whether this challenge was breaking something she hadn't meant to touch. Ava forced herself to take a slow walk outside, hoping the air might distract her from the hollow inside her. But the world felt sharper than usual, almost too bright. The smell of street vendors cooking hot food drifted toward her, uninvited and overwhelming. Her stomach tightened painfully at the scent, and she had to look away. People moved around her with casual ease, their bags full, their steps steady. She felt strangely separate from them, as though she were walking through a world she didn't fully belong to anymore. A wave of lightheadedness washed through her, and she steadied herself against a brick wall. She wondered if this was still minimalism or if she was slipping into something harsher, something she hadn't prepared herself for. Hunger, she realized, had a way of stripping illusions faster than any lifestyle challenge. She returned home with steps that felt heavier than when she'd left. The moment she closed the door behind her, the apartment's silence pressed in again. She lowered herself onto the floor, letting her back slide against the wall as she tried to ground herself. Her heartbeat thudded unevenly, echoing through her chest like a warning. She whispered small reassurances that didn't feel true, trying to convince herself she was still in control. But the truth was harder now, clearer in its discomfort. Hunger wasn't teaching her simplicity, it was teaching her fragility. She rested her head against her knees, feeling her breathing turn shallow. In the corner of the room, the unopened box seemed to watch her, a quiet reminder of the things she had avoided long before this challenge began. By midday, the fatigue had deepened into something heavier. Ava tried to drink water to calm the swirl in her stomach, but the emptiness beneath the surface remained sharp. She stood in front of the small bathroom mirror, gripping the sink as she studied her reflection. Her eyes looked different, tired in a way she couldn't entirely hide. She wondered how quickly a person could unravel when the body is pushed too far. She splashed cold water on her face, hoping it might steady her. But the sting only sharpened her awareness of how fragile she felt. She knew she needed to rest, but rest didn't fill the hollow. It only made her more aware of it. She pressed her forehead against the cool mirror, breathing slowly, letting the quiet bathroom close around her. Later that evening, Ava tried to distract herself by organizing the few belongings she still owned. She folded her clothes slowly, placing each item into neat stacks, as though order alone could steady her breathing. But the weakness in her limbs made every movement feel sluggish, and frustration rose in her chest. She felt trapped inside a body that was asking for something she refused to give. Sitting back on her heels, she exhaled shakily. She had thought minimalism meant freedom, but right now it felt like confinement. Her eyes drifted again toward the box in the corner, still unopened, still quietly present. She wondered if her hunger was pulling more to the surface than emptiness. Maybe it was dragging forward the things she had buried long before she chose to live with less. Ava woke from a restless half-sleep, the kind that left her feeling more drained than before she closed her eyes. The hunger had settled into a dull ache that pulsed like a bruise under her ribs. She tried to rise, but had to grip the edge of the mattress to steady herself. The morning light felt too bright, almost intrusive. She shuffled to the kitchen counter, hoping the routine of moving might bring some clarity, but nothing felt steady anymore. She dropped a spoon by accident, and the small metallic clang hit her nerves harder than it should have. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. She could sense the experiment slipping from her grasp, control thinning like a thread stretched too far. The box in the corner stayed silent, but it felt heavier today, as though its presence was part of the unraveling. She stepped outside to breathe, hoping the air would settle her thoughts. Instead, she felt unsteady, drifting down the hallway like a shadow of herself. When she reached the mailboxes, she paused to rest her hand on the cool metal. Her head felt light, her vision soft at the edges. She nearly turned back. But then, Leo's voice broke the quiet. He lived across the hall and had always offered small, easy hellos. Today his voice carried worry. He asked if she was okay, and she tried to answer lightly, but her voice cracked in a way she couldn't hide. Leo watched her with a gentle steadiness, the kind that made her feel fragile. She tried to assure him she was fine, but the concern in his eyes said he didn't believe her. And she wasn't sure she believed herself either. Ava tried to pull herself together after returning to her apartment, but the encounter with Leo lingered in her mind. She hated how easily he'd seen through her attempt at composure. She sat on the floor near the window, trying to focus on her breathing. Her stomach growled loudly, echoing in the quiet room. She hugged her knees and pressed her forehead against them, trying to shut out the growing sense that her experiment was slipping into something unsafe. She didn't want pity. She didn't want to admit that her body was reaching its limit. She stared at the box again, feeling odd heaviness in her chest. It was strange how an object could carry so much weight without moving at all. She closed her eyes and tried to gather herself, but the stillness felt like pressure. By late afternoon, Ava tried to convince herself that she could push through the discomfort if she just stayed busy. She wiped the counters again, even though they were already clean. She moved slowly, her body heavy, her breath shallow. She kept hearing Leah's voice in her mind, the concern behind it. It made her chest tighten, not because she didn't appreciate it, but because she didn't feel she deserved it. Every movement felt like moving through thick air. She wondered how much longer she could pretend this was simply discipline. She paused, bracing herself against the counter as the room tilted slightly. She clenched her jaw and swallowed back a wave of dizziness. The silence felt too loud, too revealing, as though the walls themselves were watching her unravel. Night fell with a heaviness that made everything feel slower. Ava sat on the floor, legs stretched out, trying to conserve energy. She wished she could pretend the ache inside her was meaningful, that it was teaching her something noble. But all she felt was weakness, a kind of quiet desperation that made her throat tight. She rested her head back against the wall and exhaled shakily. She wondered if she had pushed too far, crossed the line between intentional living and self-neglect. A soft sound echoed from the hallway. A door closing, footsteps fading, and she felt a sudden pang of longing just to feel steady again. Her gaze drifted toward the box once more. She didn't know why she kept expecting it to move, but she couldn't ignore the strange anticipation growing each day. By morning, Ava felt like she was drifting between herself and a version she barely recognized. Her thoughts scattered easily, floating away before she could hold on to them. She boiled the last of her rice, but the smell barely comforted her anymore. She stirred the pot slowly, watching the grains swell as if they had more strength than she did. When she tried to eat, the first bite felt heavy on her tongue. She rested her forehead against her hand, breathing shallowly. The hunger wasn't just physical today. It tugged at memories she didn't want to revisit, moments she'd packed away and hidden. Her chest tightened at the thought. She glanced toward the box again, and something inside her flinched. Maybe the box wasn't changing at all. Maybe she was. Later that day, a wave of weakness rolled through Ava so sudden it forced her to sit down. The hunger had changed from an ache into something sharper, almost like grief. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold herself together. Every breath felt uneven. She didn't know why memories were surfacing now, old emotions she never planned to confront. She thought simplicity would cleanse her life, make things feel clearer. Instead, it stripped away the distractions that once kept her from thinking too deeply. Her chest tightened, and she fought a sting behind her eyes. She didn't want to fall apart over a challenge she'd chosen. But the hollowness inside her felt like a crack, and she couldn't stop wondering what was pushing through it. A soft knock at the door startled her. She stood slowly, steadying herself with one hand on the wall. When she opened the door, Leo was standing there with a cautious expression. He didn't force a smile. He simply asked how she was doing. His voice was gentle, and something in it made her chest tighten. She tried to answer lightly, but he could see past her words. He asked if she needed anything, and she shook her head too quickly. The concern in his eyes deepened. For a moment, Ava felt exposed, as though the empty apartment behind her revealed more than she intended. She wanted to close the door and hide, but a part of her wished she could step forward instead. Leo didn't push. He simply said he'd be around if she needed help. The simplicity of it caught her off guard. After Leo left, the apartment felt even quieter than before. Ava sat on the floor with her back against the wall and let her breathing slow. Hunger pulsed through her like a reminder she couldn't ignore. She thought about the people who didn't choose emptiness, who lived with scarcity every day, not as an experiment, but as a reality. Her chest tightened again, but this time with something that felt like shame. She looked toward the box in the corner, the one she had avoided opening since she moved in. The longer she stared at it, the more her nerves prickled. It wasn't the box itself that frightened her. It was what it held inside her mind. Things she had avoided for months. Hunger had opened cracks she wasn't ready to face, and the box stood at the center of them. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the tightness in her chest rise like a tide. She sat up, wrapping her arms around her legs, letting the darkness settle over the room. Hunger wasn't the loudest thing anymore. The memories were. They came in flashes, things she thought she had moved past, things she had packed away when she started over. Her breath hitched, and she pressed her forehead to her knees. The quiet felt alive, almost alert. She raised her head and looked toward the box across the room. The shadows swallowed most of it, but she could still see the outline clearly. She wasn't sure why, but she felt drawn to it, as if opening it might finally stop the storm rising inside her, or unleash it completely. The next morning, Ava tried to convince herself she could handle one small errand. She needed another bag of rice, just enough to get through 2 more days. She moved slowly down the sidewalk, feeling every step in her legs. When she reached the grocery store, the bright lights felt harsher than usual. She steadied herself against a cart, pretending she was simply catching her breath. But as she walked toward the aisle, her vision wavered. The colors around her blurred and swam. She reached for the shelf, but her hand missed. A strange ringing filled her ears, swelling until she couldn't hear anything else. Her heart thudded unevenly, and the floor seemed to sway. She blinked hard, trying to anchor herself, but the world tilted sharply. The last thing she felt was a rush of cold air as her knees gave out beneath her. A sharp gasp cut through the ringing in Ava's ears as she felt herself falling. She didn't hit the ground immediately. Hands caught her, steadying her with surprising gentleness. A voice spoke, low and calm, telling her to breathe slowly. Ava blinked until shapes sharpened again. A woman crouched beside her, looking at her with steady eyes filled with concern that felt both grounding and overwhelming. Ava tried to apologize, but the woman shook her head softly. She guided Ava to sit against a nearby wall and encouraged her to keep breathing. The store noise faded into the background, replaced by the warmth of someone who wasn't letting her slip away. Ava swallowed hard, trying to gather herself. She didn't understand why kindness made her chest ache more than hunger. Ava tried to insist she was fine, but her voice wavered too much to sound convincing. Marisol stayed beside her, patient and composed, waiting for her breathing to steady. Something in her presence softened the panic swirling in Ava's chest. She didn't rush her, didn't judge her, didn't look away. When Ava finally lifted her head, Marisol asked quietly if she had eaten. The question made Ava's throat tighten. She wanted to explain, to say it was all part of a challenge she'd chosen, but the words felt thin and foolish. Marisol's expression didn't shift into pity. It stayed calm, understanding in a way that made Ava's eyes burn. It was strange how a stranger could look at her and see the truth she had been avoiding. Marisol helped Ava to her feet, guiding her slowly toward a quieter corner of the store. Ava felt shaky but more anchored than she had all week. They stopped near a small employee bench where Marisol encouraged her to sit again. She brought her a small cup of water and a few crackers. insisting gently that Ava eat something before trying to stand again. Ava hesitated, embarrassment knotting in her stomach. But Marisol's expression held no judgment, only understanding. When Ava finally took a bite, relief washed through her body, quicker than she expected. Marisol stayed close, giving her space but not distance. The simple act of being cared for made Ava's eyes fill, though she tried hard to blink the feeling away. When Ava felt steady enough to stand, Marisol walked her toward the front of the store. She didn't push for explanations, didn't ask why Ava had let herself get so empty. Instead, she offered a simple truth. There is a difference between simplifying your life and starving your body. The words settled into Ava like a weight she had been carrying, but hadn't named. She paused near the exit, feeling the air shift cooler around her. Marisol touched her arm lightly, telling her she should come back if she ever needed help. No questions asked. Ava swallowed hard, nodding. She stepped outside and breathed deeply, feeling the world press around her in a way that was both overwhelming and grounding. Something inside her had cracked open, but for the first time, it felt like a crack that might let healing in. Ava returned to her apartment with the quietest steps she'd taken in days. The softness of Marisol's words stayed with her, echoing in her chest like something both painful and necessary. The room felt colder than she remembered, and she wrapped her arms around herself as she walked inside. She noticed the box immediately. It sat in the corner exactly where she'd left it, yet something about it felt heavier now. Not physically, but emotionally. Hunger had stripped away all her distractions, all her excuses, leaving her alone with the things she tried to hide. She sank to the floor and let her breathing settle, staring at the box until her heartbeat slowed. She wasn't sure she was ready, but she knew she couldn't keep avoiding it. The room felt too still, too expectant. It was time. Ava reached out tentatively, her hand hovering above the box, as though touching it might set something inside her loose. Her breath trembled. She tried to steady herself, reminding her body that she was safe, even if the memories weren't. When her fingers finally brushed the cardboard, she felt an unexpected shiver move up her arm. The box wasn't magical. It was ordinary, worn and quiet, but it held a part of her life she had sealed away because facing it meant feeling everything she had run from. She pulled it toward her and rested it in her lap. Her heart beat unevenly, but she didn't let go. She slid her thumb under the tape, hesitating only once before peeling it open. The sound was small, but it filled the room like a tear being made. Inside the box, Ava found the items she'd buried beneath her attempt at a new life. Photographs she hadn't dared to look at, notes she couldn't bring herself to throw away, fragments of a chapter she had tried to skip. She lifted a small photo, her hand shaking as she studied it. The image pulled her back to a moment she had avoided for months, a moment filled with someone she had lost too quickly. The ache in her chest rose sharply, but she didn't put the photo down. She let herself feel it, the grief, the longing, the unresolved pain she had disguised as minimalism. Hunger had made her body weak, but this memory made her heart tremble in a deeper way. She closed her eyes and breathed through the weight, letting the emotion settle instead of hiding from it. Ava continued sifting through the contents, each item bringing a new wave of memory. Some soft, some sharp. She ran her fingers along an old note, the handwriting familiar enough to make her breath hitch. She let herself sit with the heaviness instead of turning away. The hunger she'd been fighting for days seemed to dull under the weight of something deeper. It struck her that she hadn't emptied her life to find clarity. She had emptied it to avoid the things that hurt. Minimalism had become her shield, and hunger had cracked it open. She rested the note on her knee, feeling her body lean into the truth she'd been avoiding. She wasn't weak. She was grieving. And she finally let herself acknowledge it without judgment. Ava sat in silence for a long time, the box now fully open. Its contents laid gently around her like pieces of herself she had finally allowed back into the room. The quiet felt different, not threatening, not hollow, but honest. She realized she had been starving more than her body. She had starved her emotions, her memories, her grief, pretending she could outrun them by living small. But simplicity wasn't meant to erase the past. It was meant to make room for what mattered. She placed the last item back into the box softly. Not to hide it, but to honor it. She leaned back, breathing slowly, feeling a small but certain shift inside her. For the first time in days, the hollow in her chest felt a little less empty. She wasn't healed, but she was facing the truth. And that, she realized, was a kind of nourishment too. Morning arrived, with a softness Ava hadn't felt in weeks. She woke slowly, her body tired but steadier, as though something inside her had loosened during the night. The room looked the same. Bare walls, quiet corners, the open box still resting near her. But the heaviness around her had shifted. She rolled onto her side and let her eyes linger on the scattered memories she hadn't put away. They didn't feel like threats anymore. They felt like truths she had finally stopped running from. She sat up and breathed in deeply, surprised by the sense of calm settling in her chest. The hunger was still there, but it didn't feel like the center of her world anymore. She was ready to feed her body again, not because she was giving up, but because she had finally begun to understand why she'd starved herself in the first place. Ava gathered a few of the items from the floor and placed them gently back inside the box, this time with intention, not avoidance. The act felt quiet and careful, like she was honoring a part of her life instead of burying it. When she stood, her legs wobbled only slightly. She made her way to the kitchen area and filled a pot with water, letting the soft rhythm of the faucet ground her. As the stove warmed, she felt a mixture of gratitude and sadness move through her. She realized she didn't have to shrink her world to heal. She only needed to make space for what mattered. When the water started to simmer, she watched the small bubbles rise and felt her shoulders soften. Nourishment suddenly felt like an act of gentleness instead of defeat. Later that afternoon, Ava stepped outside for the first time with a steadiness she hadn't felt in days. The world looked different, still noisy, still imperfect, but somehow gentler. She walked slowly toward the grocery store, not out of desperation, but with a sense of intention. She wanted to buy real food, something that would nourish her, not just physically but emotionally. When she reached the entrance, she felt a small tug of nerves, but she kept going. She wasn't here to prove anything anymore. She was here because she wanted to take care of herself. The automatic doors opened with a soft whoosh, and she stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of produce and warm air. It felt like a beginning. Inside the store, Ava found herself scanning the shelves with new eyes. Instead of calculating what she could force herself to live without, she chose what her body needed. She picked up a small bag of rice, a few vegetables, and a loaf of bread. Each choice felt like an act of reclaiming something she had lost. When she approached the checkout, she felt a flutter of nerves, but also a strange excitement. She placed her items on the conveyor belt with care. Marisol recognized her instantly, offering a warm smile that settled something deep in Ava's chest. It wasn't pity, just simple, steady presence. Ava thanked her quietly, and this time the words felt full, not fragile. She left the store feeling lighter, her small grocery bag warm against her palm. When Ava returned home, she prepared a simple meal with slow, deliberate movements. The smell filled the quiet apartment, warming the space in a way she hadn't realized she missed. She sat on the floor with her bowl, taking the first bite with a tenderness that surprised her. It wasn't just food. It was a signal that she was ready to live differently. The emptiness in her life no longer felt like an escape. She understood now that minimalism wasn't about shrinking herself or outrunning pain. It was about choosing what to carry and what to release. When she finished eating, she rested her bowl beside her and looked at the open box across the room. She didn't feel fear this time, only acceptance. She finally felt full in a way that had nothing to do with hunger.